Hollywood's golden era dazzled the world with timeless films, unforgettable stars, and the magic of classic cinema. It was a time when movie legends seemed larger than life, glamorous, wealthy, and untouchable. But behind the spotlight, many vintage icons from this celebrated age of film faced heartbreaking struggles. Despite starring in beloved movies that defined the golden era of cinema, some of these actors and singers ended their lives in poverty. In this video, we uncover the shocking truth behind the glittering facade of Hollywood's most cherished vintage legends. Barbara Payton was once a rising star in Hollywood's golden era. With stunning beauty and undeniable talent, she shared the screen with legends like James Cagney in Kiss Tomorrow Goodbye, and critics believe she was destined for greatness in classic cinema. But Barbara's downfall came fast, and it came from within. Her financial ruin was largely self-inflicted, driven by scandalous relationships, substance abuse, and reckless decisions. Payton's personal life became tabloid fodder, overshadowing her film work. As her reputation soured, studios backed away and roles disappeared. Desperate for attention and spiraling emotionally, she burned through her earnings and turned to alcohol and drugs. She was arrested multiple times, either for public intoxication, writing bad checks, and petty crimes, all of which further eroded her credibility and employability in the industry. With no savings, no job offers, and a reputation in ruins, Barbara turned to prostitution on the streets of Hollywood to survive. By the time she died in 1967 at just 39, she was living with her parents, broke and battling severe health issues. The girl, once poised to become a leading lady of vintage cinema, died in obscurity, a tragic victim of fame squandered by personal demons. Dorothy Dandridge broke barriers in Hollywood's golden era, becoming the first African-American woman nominated for a Best Actress Oscar for her role in the classic film Carmen Jones. She was elegant, talented, and magnetic, a true icon of vintage cinema. But while her career reached historic heights, the system that celebrated her on screen failed her behind the scenes. Dandridge faced relentless racial discrimination that limited her roles and earning potential. Despite her acclaim, Hollywood offered her only stereotyped or minor parts after Carmen Jones, making consistent work nearly impossible. Meanwhile, her personal life spiraled. 2 failed marriages left her emotionally drained and financially strained, especially her union with Jack Dennison, who mismanaged what little money she had left. By 1963, Dandridge declared bankruptcy, owing $150,000, mostly in unpaid taxes. Poor investment decisions and lack of access to the financial opportunities her white peers enjoyed kept her trapped in a cycle of instability. Isolated and nearly forgotten, she died in 1965 at age 42 with just $2.14 in her bank account. Her tragic end wasn't just about bad luck, it was the result of a system that applauded her talent but never gave her the support to truly succeed. Bela Lugosi will forever be remembered as the definitive Count Dracula, a haunting presence that helped shape the horror genre during Hollywood's golden era. With his unmistakable accent and piercing stare, he became a staple of classic vintage cinema. But while his name became synonymous with fear on screen, the real terror in Lugosi's life was financial ruin and professional isolation. Typecast after Dracula in 1931, Lugosi struggled to land diverse roles. Studios saw him only as a horror villain, limiting his opportunities and income. As his fame faded, he found himself working in low-budget films for minimal pay just to survive. Making matters worse, Lugosi developed a dependence on morphine and methadone, originally prescribed for chronic pain, which further derailed his career and reputation. By 1955, he filed for bankruptcy. He had only $1,000 in assets and owed more than triple that amount. He spent his final years in declining health, often appearing in cheap films that barely paid the bills. When he died in 1956, he had just $1,900 in cash and a few personal belongings to his name. His funeral was paid for by Frank Sinatra, a final act of kindness for a man who once terrified millions yet died with almost nothing. Bud Abbott, one half of the legendary comedy duo Abbott and Costello, helped define a generation of laughter. Their classic routines, especially the iconic "Who's on First," became staples of vintage cinema and early television. At their peak, they were among Hollywood's top earners during the golden era of film. bringing in millions and even raising over $85 million in war bonds during World War II. But despite all the success, Bud Abbott's later years were marked by crushing financial hardship. The trouble started with the IRS. The government disallowed around $500,000 in tax exemptions the duo had claimed from their wartime efforts. That one blow opened a floodgate of tax problems. After Lou Costello's death in 1959, Bud tried to continue solo, but his health was failing due to epilepsy and work became scarce. The IRS eventually seized his home to settle his debts, leaving Abbott to live in a small apartment with barely enough to get by. In desperation, he made public appeals for financial help, relying on fans and old friends for support. When Bud Abbott died in 1974, he was virtually penniless, a heartbreaking fall for a man whose work had once brought joy to millions across the world. John Garfield was a force in Hollywood during the 1930s and 40s, celebrated for his gritty, emotionally raw performances in classics like The Postman Always Rings Twice and Body and Soul. As one of the earliest adopters of method acting, he helped shape a new era of realism in vintage cinema. But his career and his finances were derailed not by scandal or excess, but by politics. In the early 1950s, during the height of the Red Scare, Garfield was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC. Although he denied any communist affiliations and refused to name others, just being under suspicion was enough. Hollywood turned its back on him. Studios blacklisted him and offers dried up almost overnight. With no roles, Garfield's income vanished. Legal fees, mounting debt, and emotional stress took a severe toll. Once commanding top dollar, he was suddenly scrambling to stay afloat. Friends said he became withdrawn, burdened by the betrayal of an industry he had helped elevate. On May 21, 1952, he died of a heart attack at just 39 years old. Though not entirely destitute, much of his fortune had been consumed by legal battles and lost opportunities. His death, a stark warning of how quickly politics could destroy even the most promising careers. Sammy Davis Jr. was the ultimate entertainer of his time, singer, dancer, actor, and a central figure in the legendary Rat Pack. He rose to fame during the golden era of Hollywood and dazzled audiences on both stage and screen. With his immense talent and magnetic charisma, Sammy became a symbol of classic American showbiz. But behind the glitz, his financial story was one of chronic excess and devastating debt. Despite earning tens of millions over his career, Davis lived far beyond his means. He owned multiple luxury homes, splurged on exotic cars, designer clothes, and extravagant jewelry. He was also known for his generosity, often helping friends, family, and colleagues, but he rarely budgeted, and his unchecked lifestyle came at a steep cost. The real blow came from the IRS years of unpaid taxes and mounting penalties snowballed into a staggering $7 million debt. Forced to sell off assets, Sammy still died in 1990 with more than $5 million owed. Even as he battled throat cancer, he kept performing to try and pay it all back. His story is a sobering reminder that even the brightest stars of vintage cinema weren't immune to the crushing weight of financial missteps. Terry Thomas, with his trademark gap-toothed grin and impeccable comedic timing, was a beloved figure in British and Hollywood cinema. Known for classics like Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, he built a career playing charming rogues and upper-class eccentrics. At the height of his fame during the golden era of film, Terry Thomas enjoyed the rewards of success: lavish homes, luxury travel, and a reputation as one of cinema's great comic talents. But his fortune didn't last. In the early 1970s, Terry Thomas was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The condition steadily robbed him of his ability to work, and as the roles disappeared, so did the income. Medical expenses soared, estimated at over £75,000 per year, forcing him to sell his home, his belongings, and eventually exhaust his entire life savings. With no real safety net, he relied on the generosity of friends and fans. In 1989, a group of fellow actors organized a benefit concert to raise funds for his care. But by then, his circumstances had become dire. Terry Thomas died in 1990 in a modest retirement home. His final years marked not by fame or fortune, but by the quiet pain of being forgotten by an industry he helped define. Marie Prevost was once the epitome of vintage Hollywood charm. A darling of the silent film era, she lit up the screen in classics like The Marriage Circle and Kiss Me Again. Her wit, beauty, and charisma made her one of the most beloved actresses of her time. But when cinema shifted to sound, Marie's golden era faded, fast and cruelly. The transition to talkies was disastrous for many silent stars, and Marie was no exception. Her voice, once irrelevant in silent films, didn't resonate with sound audiences. Roles dried up almost overnight, and with no work, her income vanished. The loss of fame devastated her emotionally, and she turned to alcohol to dull the pain. Without steady income or support, Marie's finances collapsed. She lived in a crumbling Los Angeles apartment, surviving on scraps and fading memories of stardom. Years of alcoholism and malnutrition took a brutal toll. In 1937, at just 38, she died alone and broke, her body discovered days later. Reports said she had just $300 to her name. Once adored by millions, Marie Provost became a haunting reminder of how quickly Hollywood can turn its back and how cruel silence can be when fame runs out. The golden era of Hollywood gave us unforgettable stars and timeless films, but behind the classic movies and vintage charm were lives filled with tragedy and loss. These icons of cinema shaped history, yet many died in poverty, betrayed by fame, fortune, or both. Their stories remind us that even in Hollywood, the spotlight doesn't guarantee a happy ending.